The film begins in the late 1950s. A young man, Arthur Vance, becomes acquainted with the wealthy Hartford couple. He rented a Princeton University student jacket, and they assumed he had studied with their son, Charles. Princeton? Most likely, you'll know our son, Charles. Charles Hartford, I couldn't help noticing your jacket. Yes, in reality, Arthur is poor and works various odd jobs. The next day, Mr. Hartford meets Arthur and offers the new acquaintance $1,000 if he can persuade his spoiled son, Charles, to return home. His son, a rich playboy, is currently squandering his fortune in Italy. That's where Arthur must go. He learns that Charles loves jazz music, and Arthur memorizes popular hits to make it easier to gain the wealthy man's trust. A luxurious car with a driver picks up Arthur and takes him to the port. At the Italian terminal, Arthur meets socialite Eleanor, and for some reason introduces himself as Charles Hartford. Eleanor Vance. Charles Hartford, hello. The young woman recognizes the name of the wealthy heir and becomes interested in him. He immediately improvises stories about his life. Arthur arrives in the charming seaside village of Montebello. He studies Italian and watches Charles and his girlfriend, Clara, through binoculars. Wearing light green swim trunks, he goes to the beach and pretends to have recognized Charles Hartford. They supposedly studied together at Princeton. The couple finds the pale young man amusing and invites him to dinner sometime. Later, Arthur accidentally discovers that Charles has an Italian mistress, Sophia. Because of this, Charles is late for breakfast with Clara, but Arthur Vance already keeps her company. Charles is curious about the talents of the bespectacled young man. Everybody should have one talent. What's yours? Forging signatures, telling lies, impersonating practically anybody. Arthur immediately demonstrates this by perfectly mimicking Charles's father's voice. This both amuses and unsettles the wealthy man. Clara is also impressed. Arthur then reveals Mr. Hartford and explains that he was hired to bring the son home. Did you ever conceive of going to Italy, Arthur, and, bringing him back? What? Charles becomes angry. He has no intention of leaving. Arthur goes to say goodbye to the couple and accidentally drops some records from his bag. It turns out both young men like jazz and even the same performers. This gives them an excuse to go to Naples together to Charles's favorite jazz club. There, the playboy kisses another woman and sings on stage. Arthur increasingly enjoys the wealthy lifestyle here much more than in New York. He is even invited on stage to join the fun. Charles kisses him on the cheek. The next morning, the wealthy man writes a letter, or rather types it. He always does it this way. Charles decides that Arthur will act as a double agent and help him extract money from his father. For the first $1,000 of allowance, they plan to buy a car, or at least a refrigerator. Charles lodges Arthur at his place. The young man practices mimicking the homeowner's voice while trying on his expensive watch. Arthur learns to sail his friend's yacht and dreams of visiting famous European cities. Arthur also grows closer to Clara. While walking, they buy fruit from Sophia. Arthur spends virtually every minute of his life with Charles. Between choosing a car and a refrigerator, they opt for the latter. Arthur doesn't want to reveal his poor New York life and doesn't admit he has only one shirt. He notices that Charles makes spelling mistakes and his handwriting is childish. But most importantly, Arthur sees his signature. In the evening, the men drink beer while Arthur teaches Charles to write correctly as Charles takes a bath. Arthur asks to join him. The playboy refuses, but then stands and shakes his manhood in front of him. Mr. Hartford loses patience and demands that his son return by Thanksgiving. But the friends are not concerned with that. They have arrived in Rome. They are joined by a third friend of Charles, Robert Miller. The bright and loud man immediately overshadows Arthur and grabs all the playboys' attention. Our hero has to explore the ancient city alone. Returning to Montebello alone, he wears Charles's clothes and goofs around in them. However, the wealthy man also came home and did not appreciate such audacity from his poor friend. Sorry, I wish you'd get out of my clothes. Robert brings him back to Montebello. The man looks at the bespectacled young man with contempt. Clara notices that Arthur is upset and explains that Charles is a passionate man, but people quickly bore him and he shifts his attention to other friends. The couple makes love in the cabin. Arthur spies on them and Robert mocks him for it. On the shore, Sophia stands sadly. The trio observes a Christian ritual attended by the whole village. Suddenly, a woman's body surfaces. It's Sophia. She has committed suicide. I'll go see what's the matter. I'll go later. He admits to Arthur that the woman was pregnant with his child, which is why she acted this way. He had refused to give her money for an abortion. Arthur says this is now their secret and he will keep it. In another letter, Mr. Hartford notifies Arthur that he will stop funding him as he was unable to influence his son. Charles is also ready to say goodbye to him. The spectacled young man must return to his worthless life. But before that, they visit a jazz festival in San Remo together. Arthur feels more than just friendship for his companion, and Charles finds him creepy. At the festival, Charles questions Arthur about whether he really studied at Princeton and whether he really likes jazz. They even bet with Clara that it's not true, and Charles wins. Arthur had been pretending and lying all along. The next day, the playboy rents a boat to explore the area and of course takes Arthur with him. Arthur shares his plans to move there so they can rent a house together and continue spending time. But Charles is going to marry Clara and is even glad that Arthur is leaving. I love Clara, you love me. You're not marrying me. Arthur, I don't love you. No, I don't mean that as a threat. To be honest, I'm a little relieved you're going. The bespectacled young man clings to him like a leech and can be incredibly boring. Arthur responds by bringing up all his faults. Infidelities, inconsistency, refusal to admit he is gay, which in Arthur's opinion he is. Charles snaps, slaps him, mocks him, and is about to start the motor when he unexpectedly gets hit in the face with an oar. Blood gushes from the wound and floods the boat. A fight breaks out. Arthur grabs the oar again and beats his beloved Charles to death. After lying with the body in his arms, he drowns him with the boat. He goes to the hotel to collect keys and belongings, and the concierge calls him by another name. You must be very cool. Senor Hartley, yes, no, he realizes he can simply assume a new identity and act in Charles's name. After all this, Arthur returns to Montebello and immediately types a letter in Charles's name, effortlessly forging his signature. He lies to Clara that the wealthy man decided to go to Rome and asks her to deliver perfumes with the letter, as well as gather his saxophone and some clothes. It seems Charles has decided to leave them. He is so fickle. The young woman reads the letter. It turns out Charles really decided to move to Rome alone, and she blames herself for pushing him too. Much with talks about marriage, Arthur checks into 2 Roman hotels at once, one under the name Charles Hartford, the other under his own. He takes advantage of the fact that Charles's passport photo isn't very clear. Calling both hotel rooms and leaving messages, he fakes conversations between himself and the supposedly dead Charles. In a Gucci store, he runs into Eleanor again. She knows Robert Miller, who has told her about Clara and Charles's relationship. Arthur, however, assures her they have broken up. To Eleanor, he is still Charles Hartford, not Arthur Vance. At the bank, Arthur receives money transfers in Charles's name. He gets a custom-tailored suit and Eleanor flirts with him, inviting him to the opera, an event Arthur genuinely enjoys as he finds the story relatable. In the foyer, he encounters Clara and her companion. Quickly, he removes Charles's rings and puts on glasses, keeping his disguise intact. Clara is surprised to see him in Rome and still worried about her boyfriend's behavior. They almost bump into Eleanor, but David, wanting to get closer to Arthur, schedules a meeting for the next day. Arthur discreetly leads Eleanor away from the opera, telling her he saw Clara and wanting to avoid a scene of jealousy. He walks her home and arranges a meeting at the same cafe where David and Clara plan to meet. By cleverly orchestrating their encounter, Arthur learns that Eleanor has romantic feelings for Charles, resolving the situation with both women. Well, unless he meant us to meet. That'd be a little cool, wouldn't it? Embarrassed, Eleanor leaves the cafe and Arthur rushes off to meet his friends. Outrage at Charles's shameless behavior, Clara decides to leave Rome. By Christmas, Arthur has settled into a new wealthy and secluded life in a luxurious apartment, but his peace is disrupted when Robert Miller, who hasn't seen Charles in a long time, discovers that he lives there. Arthur's attempts at deception fail. Robert knows too much. It's a new piano. Probably shouldn't. He notices that Charles would never live in such an apartment, and Robert senses something suspicious. The landlady identifies Arthur as Charles. Surprised, Robert returns and is struck on the head with a sculpture. Several blows later, he dies. Panting, Arthur seats the body in a cabriolet and dumps it somewhere on the street. The next day, the police come for questioning. About the previous night, Mr. Hartford is the last person who saw Robert alive, and Arthur is forbidden to leave Rome. Paranoia sets in. He thinks he sees Charles and almost falls off his scooter. Clara arrives convinced that her boyfriend killed Robert. She notices that whenever she searches for Charles, she finds Arthur instead. Arthur pretends to drive her to her fiancé, but leaves her nearby after spotting the police outside his home. He drives in circles until he returns home, now surrounded by reporters. The inspector questions him about Arthur Vance. A flooded boat stolen last November by 2 Americans was found in San Remo. The inspector asks if he has a photo of Mr. Vance. No one has seen Arthur since San Remo except Charles. The inspector invites Arthur for an identification session. A woman claims she saw 2 men enter Robert Miller's car. Afterwards, Clara tries to enter her fiancé's apartment, but Arthur doesn't let her in. He writes a letter to himself as Charles, taking responsibility for Robert's death and calling himself Charles's spiritual brother, claiming he would have been a better son to Mr. Hartford. Arthur resumes his identity as Arthur Vance, narrowly avoiding the police. He travels to Venice and meets David. Rumors suggest Charles killed Arthur and left under his passport. They go to the local police. A new inspector is now on the case. The previous one, Miss Charles, is the sole suspect. The strict inspector questions whether Arthur might be homosexual and whether he killed Charles and Robert. Arthur protests indignantly. The inspector shows him a forged letter, Charles's supposed death note. Arthur feigns anger and confusion. Arthur enjoys his time at David's mansion. He seduces David, who seems willing to join him in a bath. On the train station platform, they meet Clara, who is not thrilled to see Arthur. Charles's father is coming with a private detective who discovers that Charles withdrew $1,000 before his disappearance, an unusual act for someone planning suicide. David rents a house for Arthur while Clara stays there. She notices how much Arthur has changed. In a private meeting with Mr. Hartford, Arthur is seen as an ally regarding Charles. You know, people always say that you can't choose your parents, but you can't choose your children. Arthur dreams of having killed Charles. Clara and David return from a walk. David offers Arthur privacy, and Arthur gives him the house key. While Arthur bathes, Clara finds Charles's ring and panics, demanding answers. Arthur asks for time to dress and contemplates using a dangerous razor to kill her. Clara is about to leave, but Arthur stops her. She senses danger. He accidentally cuts his hand. She cries, and David intervenes. Arthur later meets Mr. Hartford, the detective, and Clara. The discovery of the rings changes everything. Arthur talks with the detective, who learns Arthur never studied at Princeton but tuned pianos there. Charles had almost killed another man out of jealousy and hid Robert's car numbers, confirming he committed the murder. Mr. Hartford interprets a letter as Charles's request to transfer money to Arthur for loyalty. Clara remains suspicious. In the 1950s, men rarely heeded women, and Mr. Hartford dismisses Clara's concerns as hysteria. Arthur travels with David to Athens. Eleanor, traveling on the same ship with friends, immediately approaches Charles. She still has feelings, and Arthur kisses her. David witnesses the kiss, jealous. Arthur lies again, switching between identities. He admits he always thought it's better to be someone than nothing. He lies beside David, asking what's good about Arthur Vance, wrapping a scarf around his hand, recalling how he strangled David and cried, "He has killed